Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining to another one of our webinar series. My name is Geordie. You might recognize me from a couple of the previous ones. Me and Hannah have switched places today. I'm going to be chairing it. So today, Hannah is going to be presenting on the BNG monitoring in practice. And I'm going to be sitting here and sort of running the admin and doing the questions at the end. So feel free to chuck any questions in you have in the comments and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. But I'll hand over to Hannah now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jodie. Yeah, we have been doing a series over the spring and summer, an in-practice series. If you don't know already, we've already done one on our field surveys where we show you how to use our field survey app and how that works with our system, kindly presented by Jodie. We also have one where we go into depth on our reporting wizards. So we have reporting wizards which help you generate reports using the data that's on our system and it draws it through, automating that part of the work for you. We did one on our portfolio view that we have as part of our system, where you can see across your different sites and projects how that's working in terms of your metric calculations. And then we did one also on our planning function, which allows you to compare and contrast different biodiversity net gain designs. But the one today, of course, that we're going to focus on is monitoring. Before I commence, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So I'm a senior ecological solutions consultant here at AI Dash. I'm in my second or third year, I think, here. Prior to that, I have done a good 13 years as a consultant ecologist. So I bring all that background to helping to develop the product. I specialize in botany, habitat survey, and because of that, I was drawn into Biodiversity Net Gain because I would often be asked to go and do the condition assessments for it. So I kind of fell into it. But it has brought me here, which is great. And I also get to use my expertise as a trainer for BNG with SIAM, the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. But without further ado, let's get into some of the detail. Um, so you, presuming that you've done a planning application and you've sent it through and you've been successful in having that granted, great, you've done a whole lot of work and you've been rewarded at that point. But what happens next in terms of the biodiversity net gain? Because that's only really getting started. There's still 30 years to go, unfortunately. Um, so today, what we're going to go through is what the law actually requires at that point, the different routes that you can use to secure your biodiversity gains, what the monitoring in the HMMP, which is the Habitat Management and Monitoring Plan, actually stands for, what good looks like in that respect, and then finally, the kind of exciting bit is where I go and show you our monitoring feature that is part of our BNG AI product and how that helps you in your obligations. But in a nutshell, the key thing that underpins this is the Environment Act. That requires that you must secure your biodiversity obligations. That obligation is secured to the land, and because of that, you need a legal agreement. So the legal agreement is the must. You must have one of those, and there's two different flavors to what that looks like, which we'll come to. The second thing is the Habitat Management and Monitoring Plan. So that's a technical document, and that describes how you're going to do what you need to do. It's submitted with the Biodiversity Gain Plan. The Biodiversity Gain Plan is essentially a checklist of all those tasks you need to do in terms of planning, but also in terms of discharge of conditions for biodiversity net gain. Um, Under the Town and Country Planning Act, you may have to supply a draft HMMP, so that might come before planning permission. It's worth finding out from the local planning authority if that applies to you and if they're expecting that. It's not mandatory, but it can be expected, and they might make things a little bit difficult if you don't supply it. Under the Planning Act 2008, that's for the really big developments, so your significantly nationally significant infrastructure projects, you have to provide both a draft habitat management and a monitoring plan and an updated one when you submit your biodiversity gain plan. The HMMP has to set out who monitors what, how often, and against what targets. They will principally be around achieving a particular habitat type and also a level of habitat condition. And both, so habitat type, there's is associated with distinctiveness, and then you have condition as well. And they're both basically measures of quality. And we'll talk about, I'll use those terms a couple of times in the webinar. So look out for that. It's technical terminology, but basically they both mean we're talking about habitat quality. The habitat management and monitoring plan that we use, it is based on a template that is provided by Natural England. So Natural England has provided a template. It's easily accessible. You can go to gov.uk to get it, and you can have a look through what is required in that respect, but you don't have to use that template. So long as you do provide how you're going to maintain the habitat, who is going to be responsible for creating or enhancing the habitat, so the construction side of things, and then who is going to be responsible for the maintenance, management, and then monitoring of that habitat, so that aftercare. There's three different routes to biodiversity net gain delivery, on-site, off-site, and then statutory credits. The statutory credits is a last resort. The reason I bring it up in terms of monitoring is that it changes who does the monitoring. So if you're delivering net gain on-site, then the monitoring is going to be the responsibility of the landowner or the appointed agent. If you're delivering it off-site or doing a combination, then that would be your habitat bank operator. So they'll be responsible for making sure that the monitoring happens. If you have the statutory credits and you've had to use that, then you're kind of pretty much off the hook. The government takes care of it. You don't have to even produce HMMP for that side of things. The government will take that from you, and then it will, I think most likely it has its own habitat banks. Natural England is actually registered as a responsible body, so they might be operating those. Um, so that's who is responsible in terms of monitoring. In terms of that legal aspect, securing the obligation, that can be done in two different ways. It can either use a Section 106 agreement, or a conservation covenant can be used. Section 106 agreements are well, they've been around for a long time. They're used for all sorts of things. And because it was an existing mechanism that could be used for biodiversity, that's what has been used probably mostly, I would expect, so far, whereas the Conservation Covenant is relatively new and comes with Biodiversity Net Gain. The key difference really between the two is that the Conservation Covenant also adds an additional kind of layer of accountability, and that is through the responsible body. So the responsible body is an organisation which will actively monitor how that obligation is being acted upon, and they have the power to enforce action if obligations aren't met. One thing to note is that you can actually get templates out there on Section 106s. There are some local planning authorities that have them available on their websites, and there's a few out there. It's quite helpful just from a point of view of knowing what they look like. So worth having a look. Obviously, the biggest caveat with all of that is that it is a template. So as soon as it gets to your own circumstances, you'll have one that's very specific to you. And because of that, you'll be wanting your own legal independent advice to do that. Another little difference with the Conservation Covenant is it's voluntary, but that doesn't mean that it's not still legally binding. So you enter into that voluntarily, but you're kind of tied down at that point. You have to deliver on your obligation at that point. And those responsible bodies, they're always kind of associated with nature conservation. So they can only be a responsible body if they have a key function in relation to nature conservation. And so because of that, you'll often find that they are charities. There's a lot of local planning authorities actually that do that role too. Okay, what about the monitoring part of the monitoring plan? One of the first questions is, well, how much monitoring do I actually need to do? Something worth understanding because, of course, with any of the activities that you're doing for this, there'll be cost implications. Ultimately, it will depend on the size and nature of the habitats present, as well as your development, the nature of your development. But ultimately, it should be proportionate to what you're actually trying to do. There's kind of quite standard intervals to some degree that your consultant ecologist will probably advise on. For example, you almost always do the first couple of years and you might do the third. Often after that, it's spaced out according to the habitat, and it gets kind of gradually, those intervals tend to get bigger. But they will be able to advise you ultimately. It's also an advantage of doing a draft HMMP for your own purposes to the LPA because you can agree and make sure it's clear that those kind of intervals that you're proposing are going to be appropriate and that they're agreed with that. What does monitoring consist of? Well, there's a number of different things that it should include. You'll have some kind of site log where you are actually adding the management action. So the management action does become important in at this stage because you need to know if a particular action has the intended effect that you're going to monitor. So if you've got grassland and it hasn't been cut, then you can't necessarily expect that your habitat is going to be in the condition that perhaps it should be because it hasn't been cut when it should be. Um, the next thing that you should include in that list of ingredients is your field survey. So we go out and we do field surveys. We collect the same information that we collect at the baseline because we have to have a repeatable method that can be compared. And that includes the habitat condition assessment as a key piece of that. And those criteria within that condition assessment are essentially your kind of key performance indicators for that habitat to monitor where it's going and progressing. So you need that field survey element to help you do that at the highest level of detail. But also within our system, once you have that information, you can very easily produce a metric. So if you're unfamiliar with our system at the moment, this is the first time you're kind of maybe engaging with us, we have a system, a web application, which will pull data from our field survey app and pull it through right into the statutory metric and it automates that. It literally is a button that you'll press and it will do it in about a few minutes. So once you've got those metrics, you can then compare your baseline one to your post implementation one, and at that stage of monitoring, and then you can see, oh, are we on target here? Are our calculations and our kind of units are they going up as they should be increasing as we're getting to that target? Remote sensing has a role here. So we're a remote sensing first business. Remote sensing can really help in between those scheduled visits. So it can kind of anticipate things that are happening on the ground. So, for example, one of the things that are kind of big in habitat management is where you get a particular habitat that is encroaching on another. So if you have grassland, for example, and you want to make sure that it's a nice species-rich grassland, you're not going to want things like hawthorn and blackthorn, bramble. We call that scrub. You don't want that to kind of come in and take over the grassland. So remote sensing can be really good for picking up those kind of things and can be used instead of having to send people to the ground and eliminating some of that cost or reducing some of that cost, as well as picking it up sooner and being able to act on it. And then finally, your monitoring will consist of some kind of reporting. So that will typically be submitted to your LPA, who's making sure you're doing what you should be doing, or it might be the Habitat Bank is managing that. The format and the frequency of that will be specified in your HMMP, and it will vary by the legal agreement. And again, if you're going to do a draft HMMP, it can be useful for your own purposes because you can work out then if that's going to work with your local planning authority, and you're going to kind of nail that down and not have any issues later on. Um, when do you start monitoring? So as soon as you've done your construction, when that last piece of landscaping goes in, when that last tree goes in, that will be the point at which you start your monitoring, or that's when your monitoring plan will kick off year one from. What does good look like? Number one, know what you're actually monitoring. Oh, it skipped one for some reason there. Hang on. Know what you are monitoring. So for most people, it will just be the baseline that you submitted with your planning application. But be aware if you are making any kind of changes, if they're considered material changes to your plans during construction, you may have to base it on your as-built plan. And that's worth just confirming with the local planning authority before you're proceeding with your HMMP plans. You need a feedback loop. So monitoring is only as good as it actually feeds into something and kind of informs something, and that is your HMMP. So your HMMP is your live document that is going to be that central point of communication to different people working on a site. And the monitoring should feed into that and say, this is happening, this is happening. At that point, as part of adaptive management, it's for those people that are responsible to work out what that means for the site. So in the case of the grassland where we've got the scrub coming in and we don't want it to be there, then that would mean that there will be the habitat contractor there that will be, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go in earlier than we planned and we're going to do some maintenance operations now so that we can kind of tick that off and make sure that we go back on track to what we want to create with our species-rich grassland. Finally, proactivity. So um, it's worth considering when you're drafting your HMMP what kind of triggers you're going to have that's going to mean you might intervene in between scheduled site visits so that you can make sure that you do go back on track. Remote sensing is one of those ways that you can be proactive. So if you want to use our system to kind of keep track of those kind of things, it can aid those kind of issues early on. Okay, so we've had an overview of monitoring at a high level, but what we really want to show you is how we actually do it within our own system. So I'm just going to switch screens now to show you our system. You may have an account with us and you may not. But basically, if you know it well, you'll kind of recognize this screen. If you don't, this is kind of almost like our landing page of our project, this overview tab here. On the left, we've got our little logo, but we've also got the organization there, so that might have your name on it. And then down the left, you'll see there's a portfolio view, which I mentioned very briefly at the beginning, and then my projects. So we're in my projects, and that's where you can find the monitoring feature. Very briefly, this is your overview. Gives you a little thumbnail of your site, your project name, and your biodiversity units there. So you get a quick snapshot. But if we scroll across to the very end, we can see our monitoring feature here. So at the very top, we've got our compare projects card here. You can see that we've got the reference projects. That's your baseline. That's grayed out at the moment. You can't touch that. But you can look at the project that you're going to compare it with. So in this case, it's our latest year, which is 2026. Um, you might have a site that is maybe you constructed in 2020. So along here, as well as 2026, you'd have 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 that you might be able to compare with too, depending on what you want to look at. We have two main views in this function. So we've got our overview and insights, and then the next view is the map comparison, which I'll show you after this one. So in our overview and insights, we've got our key metrics. So you'll see here we've got area habitats, hedgerow habitats, and watercourse habitats. They're separated purposefully that way because that's what the law requires. The law requires that you get 10% in each of those buckets. So that's why we've separated those out. So at the very top here, we can see that our monitoring site is quite small text, so hopefully you can just about see it, but that says our baseline year of 2025. We've got 453.92 units there, and then this year we've got 497 and 78 units. So we've made a gain there, and you can see that very easily, visibly with the green colouring that you're on track for that net gain. In fact, you've got 9.66% already, so that's pretty good. For your hedgerow habitat, you've got 27.59 units at baseline, and then that's gone up again in 2026. And here we've got plus 13%. So great, you've kind of achieved your net gain for your hedgerows. For the watercourse habitats, you'll see straight away at the very far right, we've got a red colouring. So that's obvious because we've tried to make it obvious that maybe it's not achieving what you want it to achieve by making it red. So that really stands out. And we can see there that we've got a loss there. So hopefully that will be that key flag at that point that you'll be able to go in and investigate further. Why is that happening? Why is that kind of going below instead of going up? If we scroll down to the next card, we've got biodiversity units by top area. And so these are just the area habitats, but these tend to be the biggest habitats that you often have got on site. And at the very top, you've got here floodplain, wetland mosaic, and coastal floodplain grazing marsh at the top. And that's at the top because it's giving the biggest contribution to that overall net change there of the 9.66%. So that's doing really well. You can see also in that line, there's one that's red, which has gone down. That isn't necessarily a problem if you know biodiversity net gain well. What happens is that you get some of these lower biodiversity habitats like the one that you can see in red. It's called cereal crops. and they're replaced for more higher performing, more biodiverse habitat types. So that might very well be purposeful change, but depending on your site and your circumstances, you may want to just double check that kind of thing when it's flagged in red that way. We then break down our habitats by distinctiveness. So that's a term I mentioned at the beginning. It's a technical term, but it just means the habitat quality, basically. It's a measure of habitat quality. So you can see it broken down by that particular category or by the particular habitat type, again, here, comparing the baseline and the latest visit that you've made. Um, and these kind of graphs here, they're there for you to interrogate your site. And also, you might find that they're really easy to just lift into particular reports that you want to make or presentations that you need to make with people that have maybe accountability or responsibility or stakeholders and decision makers. I'll show you the next view now, which is the map view, which looks kind of snazzy. I like this view. If you scroll down a tiny bit, you'll see this bit that's grayed out a little bit. That's actually the baseline side. And this bit that's kind of the bright colors is the latest year, so 2026. And then if I pull this across and you look really carefully, you'll see that this just changes slightly. So we get to about here, and I think yeah, we lose a tree there. We lose a tree slightly there in the middle, if you're following this. And then you'll see a bit of a more obvious change. So here in the baseline, we've got this orange habitat, which is floodplain, and it's changing there to grassland later on in the new design, so the latest year. Drag it across. There's another more obvious change here at the bottom where that grassland before was in the baseline was some cereal crops. So that's changed. So you can kind of have a quick visual change by just sliding this across and seeing how the site's just changed over that time. Here is the layers section. So if you're familiar with GIS, this will make sense to you, but these are all the different kind of polygon layers. So if I take developed land off, you can see that that's all our developed land. You can take all of these off, toggle them as you like. Maybe you just want to have a look at this floodplain and see that habitat on its own. So you can just take those off and look at that kind of individually. The other thing that we've got that we've made specific to some of our water utilities clients is the option to have a look at your habitats according to the no deterioration requirement under the biodiversity performance commitment. So here we've got our deterioration levels. So you can have a look and see, oh, what's high deterioration? That's probably maybe the thing that you're most worried about. So you could have a quick view. Luckily, it's not, the majority of the site, and maybe that's okay, maybe it's still not okay, but you can interrogate it according to those as well. And then finally, if you don't even want the layers, you can just take it off here at the end here in this button. These ones are just kind of allow you to kind of look at the screen slightly differently. And then the final feature that we've got here is a little notes taking section. So if you want to make any notes specific to a habitat, this one is kind of on the floodplain wetland mosaic. You can attach your note to that and write whatever you want. There's just a little sidebar here where you can edit it or delete it here as well. So if you don't want it anymore, you need to change it, then that's easy to do. That completes the tour of our system and how that does the monitoring. So I'll stop sharing that screen now and return to our other one. I think we've just got a few minutes now, hopefully, for questions.
Yeah, perfectly timed, Hannah. I think that leaves about 5 or 6 minutes for any questions, and thanks for the presentation. Okay, we've just got one come through from Jasmine. The question is there a download online we can add into the HMMP? I don't think I fully understand that question, sorry.
Not totally sure what you mean, but what I can say is that we are working on our HMMP offering further. So I mentioned at the very beginning that we have reporting wizards. So we have reporting wizards for biodiversity net gain reports and also for preliminary ecological appraisal reports. And we call them wizards because they pull data from our platform and put them straight into your report. They also have some nice features of generating text for you in certain boxes if you want it, as well as kind of standard stock text that you can use to help speed up your reporting. And our plans are that we're going to do that for the HMMP as well. So that is actually in development. So if you come back to us in a few months' time, ask us where we are with that. Hopefully, we'll be in a place to tell you, actually, we've got that wizard ready now for you, and we're going to be able to help you speed up that side of your reporting. So yeah, just keep tabs on what we're doing there, and that might be available soon.
Okay, awesome. Jasmine, let us know if that didn't answer your question and we'll circle back around. We've got another question here from Thibault, which is, could you tell what is the data source used for labeling the areas? So I'll leave that to you, Hannah, again.
Oh, the data source. It will be according to, so the first baseline year will be whatever baseline survey was done by your field ecologist, or possibly even if it's very simple, it might even be remotely based source. So that will be where your baseline information comes from for those layers. Um, then for the kind of year that you're comparing against, so the 2026 year that we saw, that will just be based on the latest survey information again. So that might be from a field survey that you've done in 2026. And if you've used our app, then that will be drawn in straightly from the app. And that will be where you get that data from basically. So some of it, perhaps if you're not familiar with our system, what we do, especially at that baseline level, we help expedite your field survey by pre-mapping habitats, and we do that through remote sensing because that's what we do first. We have very high quality satellite-based imagery that picks up habitats, and we have a whole kind of rule-based system about how we classify habitats. And that's kind of underpinned by additional data layers that inform us and give us quite high confidence of those habitat types. And we pre-map that, and then our ecologists will go out and verify that on the ground. So that's where the data comes from that you could see. And that's how we would see it working in practice if you'd use our system. I hope that answers the question.
Nice. I know we've got some in the Q&A, but I'll just finish the ones in the comment section first. I've got another one from Andrew saying, can you speak briefly on the monitoring implications for a habitat bank operator?
Oh, it's a good shout. So the Habitat Bank, I was interested to see how it works myself as I was kind of preparing this. You might be directly responsible for the monitoring. I think there's also the potential that you might want to get someone else to do it, so it's kind of independent of you as a Habitat Bank. You definitely, as far as I understand, there is ways that you can still do that yourself, and it's to do with how you operate as a professional ecologist. So depending on what your circumstances are, you might just want to find out first of all, or who's responsible for that and who can be responsible. But either route is likely to be okay. Um, and then after that, yeah, it depends on the actual legal agreement as to how you're going to submit that information to the local planning authority. So if you set that out, perhaps ideally, if you do a draft HMMP, it gives you more time in terms of what the expectations are going to be between each of the parties, as well as later on, you're going to actually do a legal agreement on that, and then things are secured more kind of fundamentally at that point. Then I think it is worth perhaps doing that draft HMMP so you know what's coming and who's going to be responsible. Um, I hope that answers the question there.
So thanks, Hannah. We've got a final one in the chat from Daniel, which is, where does a LEMP document or LEMP required by planning condition fit into the post-permission / monitoring process?
Yeah, absolutely. So LEMP, that stands for Landscape Ecological Management Plan, which some of you might be familiar with that term, maybe others not. Basically, it's a kind of plan that was is still used and possibly is more all-encompassing than the habitat management and monitoring plan. That's my interpretation. Um, so landscape ecological management plan will include all of those landscape ecological requirements. The HMMP is almost like a little kind of nested in there as something that's specific to the biodiversity net gain. Um, I think it's fine to allow a little bit of interpretation. So if that includes other kind of ecological requirements and you want to put that in your HMMP and kind of give that to the HMMP, I don't think that's going to be an issue so long as the BNG is addressed in there. But I would see it as kind of nested almost in that LEMP, or else you could integrate it into it. So again, as long as it's got the key requirements that I set out at the beginning, so who's responsible basically, who's going to do the roles under that HMMP, what are the habitats that are going to be created and enhanced and retained, and then what who's going to be operating and maintaining those habitats and how is the monitoring going to be done. So as long as you have the key ingredients of the HMMP in your LEMP, then that's most likely going to be fine. Again, with any of these things, if there's any kind of doubt about it or you're not totally confident, go and ask the local planning authority if they have any kind of issue with that. I don't feel that they really should, as long as those key details are in there, and that you can trace that back, over time. You can go back to that document to see what the baseline was and what the aspirations were. I don't see that that should be an issue.
Nice. Thanks, Hannah. We're out of time, but I do have one more from Oliver, Hannah, if you don't mind, which is, will the future HMMP wizard link management obligations/actions to areas shown on the map view?
Yeah, I think that it should. So we kind of concentrated on the monitoring aspect here. So who's going to kind of go out and do that scientific bit of doing the survey and assessment. But the management bit is obviously just as important, which is why it's kind of the other M of the plan. So yeah, definitely see a future where we have a HMMP that not only kind of gives you that detail of the monitoring, but definitely the management where you can maybe go into each of those habitat parcels and log an action, see what that action was on what date, so that you can do that process of understanding what actions had an effect and when they likely had that effect. So you can start to understand what particular actions, whether they're being effective basically or not, or you need to change those actions. And then having that log, that auditable log that you can go back to and interrogate at any time. So yeah, great suggestion. It's something that we want to do. So yeah, keep following us and you'll see where we get to with that.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Hannah. And thanks everyone for joining. As Hannah mentioned, this recording will be published on our YouTube. I linked the previous series in the chat earlier up, and I think there should be a follow-up survey with containing the link if everyone wants to go back and look at it again. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.